Hey guys, welcome back. So in the previous video we tackled that projection line style effect over here. So I'm pretty happy with that. It's a pretty basic setup, but it should do exactly what we need. And there are other things we could do here. Let me just sort out my viewport. Just trying to find a way to make it a little bit easier to see. So for example, one thing I thought of, which I'm not going to do just in case it's too busy, but you could give it a try, is here we're keeping the hexagons and here we're adding a noise to our color and we're copying lines. So those lines are being copied onto each one of the points on the hexagon. So one thing you could do is just resample this over here. And basically get lots of points to map out the full shape of the hexagon itself. And you can see this is all going really quick. And then you get a very distinct hexagon shape to these projection lines, which actually does look pretty cool. So you might want to try that if you're doing something similar. I'm going to leave it just like this for now. We'll see how it looks in the comp. So let's jump on to setting up the electrical arc style effect. So just quickly to discuss that a little bit. Here's a 2D animation site that I visit quite a bit. It's flasheffects.blogspot. And in general, with 3D effects, it's quite useful to look at the 2D style effects for inspiration, especially for timing and the way things move. And especially for electrical effects. And I find it's very common for people in 3D to basically draw a line, and I'll see if I can quickly demonstrate this. So they'll have a line, and then let's say add a noise to it. If I can find my nodes over here. So we take position, 3D noise, I usually use sparse, add it back onto the position, and promote all of these parameters. So basically what people will tend to do is generate their shapes of electricity like this. And then maybe put $F in somewhere. And the electricity moves like this. So firstly, it should never move this fast. If you're going to add movement, it should be actually very slow. And I'll discuss that again when we're actually working on the arcs. But it doesn't need to actually move faster than this. Secondly, people might not tend to make the movement based on the direction of the arc itself, in which case you end up with this sort of like unrelated motion. So if I remove this one, I've seen people do something like this quite a lot. And that just doesn't make sense. Visually, it might make sense realistically, or in certain types of effects you can get away with this kind of thing. But what we're talking about now is what's pleasing for the viewer. And in 2D effects especially, what they tend to do is they draw an interesting shape, and then it's all about how that shape evolves over time and becomes thin and dissipates, more than actually drawing a cool shape and then having a random noise moving through it. So when I'm tackling this in 3D, I much prefer to have a nice shape. So we make sure we have a good readable shape, like that. Then if we're going to add movement at all, make sure it's in the direction of the actual curve, so we get some evolution. And then the idea for me is to base the amplitude on something. So if I were to add a point here, and let's say source 1 point with a life of 1, then we'll copy this line on here. Let me just quickly put in a random rotation. Okay, let me see points. Okay, so for one, if you're going to add that noise, you would add the motion noise on the direction of the line. So maybe we have the noise moving with the line on Z, and then that line gets copied on. I don't know why my line's so huge. Okay, so we get that subtle motion and it's moving in the direction. I prefer to just skip that and then just add any direction on, but super slow, because the bulk of my motion I want to get from the amplitude. So let me just increase the point count here a little bit. And then in here, we can take age and, or even take, say, age divided by life. Put in a ramp and use this for the amplitude. Why is that not working? Ah. So it starts out straight and then it becomes more and more amplitude. So let me take off this. So you can see without the line actually even moving, or the noise moving through the line, we're still getting an interesting motion that's kind of more pleasing to look at from a viewer's perspective, because we can follow what the arc's doing. So there are a few things we could do, like for example, we could add something over here, or we could put down a p-scale and base that on age. So here the line's evolving and lengthening. So that age p-scale is just making the lines grow. So we're still not dealing with a moving noise at the moment. And then we're applying a noise. And the only difference in the noise's motion is that we're affecting the amplitude of the noise based on the age of the line. And then also importantly, we could take the age and say, put in another ramp, plug this in color, and then if we put a fit, essentially we can refit that range of age and change the lifespan of our electrical arc. So if the particle's living for a life of 1, the arc is living for a life of 1. But we can make the arc live for less long by changing the source max. So here we're saying pretend that the particle actually only lives from 0 to 0.4, then remap that from 0 to 1. Then the line, or this ramp, will only live for 40% of the time of the particle. So if I now take that, take this color ramp and say when it's born, quickly become white and then fade off to black before you die. That's now 40% the lifespan it was. I can tweak that, and if I go back to 1, those lines live a lot longer. So we can control the lifespan of our electricity independent of the particles we use to copy it on. Not only that, we can have motion that's based on just affecting the amplitude instead of actually moving the noise, which, like I said, from an artistic perspective for a viewer, it's much cleaner to look at something like this. And you can see that in the 2D effects. What we get is a few frames where our eye can determine the shape of the electricity, and then we just worried about how it evolves from there and dissipates. So we're getting something a little bit similar here, and obviously we're also lengthening the line based on the age. So all of that covers the basics of how I usually approach an electrical style effect. So I think let's just start again. And that's just a brief little intro video, but I'll finish setting up this object and start the effects properly in the next video. So let's call this decloak arcs. And right off the bat, I've got this emissive shader over here. I'm going to pop that in there. We can use the same shader as the lines because it's just emissive. So we have our arcs, we have our shader essentially. Now we need to figure out what we're using as a source. Let me also just make a mantra while I'm setting things up. Effects arcs. That should be fine for now. And by the way, for both of these, we don't need any lights because these are emissive. So we can take lights out of candidate objects. So there we are. We're set up. I think I explained my thought process behind electricity in general. And let's come back in the next video and start making our electrical effect properly. So I'll see you then.